Howdy, Greg Swann here. We are in the midst of the slow-motion meltdown of Stefan Molyneux, and I wanted to weigh in with what I consider to be good advice for former or soon-to-be former Molyneuxvians, former followers of the free domain radio internet cult. Molyneux is under fire right now for engaging in what is clearly censorious activity, violating his own previously argued principles of intellectual property in order to impose an argument of intellectual property on a critic that he wanted to silence. And this is condemnable behavior, and it is being roundly condemned, and I don't intend to pile on to the man. I think he's a blowhard, he's a gasbag, he's a demagogue. If you want to know how his career is going to progress from here, obtain a copy of the film A Face in the Crowd. It's a wonderful movie directed by Elia Kazan, a genius in Hollywood who was persecuted for being an anti-communist, written by Bud Schulberg, another genius in Hollywood who was very badly treated. It stars Andy Griffith as the central character, Lonesome Rhodes, the television demagogue. The film is about the advent of television and how television came to be such an effective propaganda medium, and therefore it is a worthwhile film to see right now anyway, as we are watching the internet stretch its legs as a propaganda medium, and as we're watching one of the early internet demagogues go up in flames, the way demagogues always do. So it's an interesting film for you to see, particularly if you have been in the thrall of Molyneux and his free domain radio movement, and if you are now questioning your involvement and wondering what the hell you're doing associating with that kind of evil. But what I'm interested in is you, not him, and therefore I'm interested in talking about ideas that can help you recover from Molyneux and from FDR, from the FDR forum, from whatever hideous things you've done to the people that you love, how to get your life back on track so that it makes sense as a human life and not as a self-willed instance of paranoid schizophrenia. I wrote a news story this week. I'm writing a series of stories called Loki's Love Letters, which is erotic fiction intended to defend my ideas of marital fidelity and chastity. So it's very funny. These are very sexy stories. They are really sexy stories, and it is very easy to read them as nothing other than erotica, as fancy literary porn. But I am making very profound, deep arguments, in my opinion, using the 2% of a marriage that consists of lovemaking, taking just that 2% and focusing only on that to show the rest of the marriage. A lot of fun for me. This is my kind of fun. Anyway, the story I wrote this week is called Sig and Swing, and it's about a couple making love on a swing. Everybody's one of those fantasies that everybody kind of has in the middle of the deck of their deck of sex fantasies is sometime late at night when it's really private, a big full moon, make love on a swing. So this wish will be fulfilled, at least in fiction. But it was very interesting for me to go through everything that goes into two adults swinging together, whether or not they're making love, and looking into the swing as kind of a lens for understanding childhood, especially for girls. That in the process of describing lovemaking on a big swing set, I end up talking in a very detailed way about the process of parenting, about feminine power in particular, and about the male leadership that makes for a happy, successful marriage. It's a fun little exercise for me to take on that much philosophy in what looks and feels like a midnight frolic among a naked, loving couple. Anyway, I'm going to make that story available for free. It publishes tomorrow on Amazon, and I'm going to make it free as soon as I can. And I'll put a link in this with this video so you can go and get the story for free. It would be 99 cents otherwise, so I'm not saving you a huge amount of money. But it's a fun story about successfully married people, about a really happily married couple and how they're happily married and how they express their happiness in their marriage. And it's just a fun glimpse of what you might anticipate in your future if you manage your romantic life appropriately. And that's one of the things that Molyneux has done to you, has led you away from the appropriate execution of a fully human life. And what I am striving to do in my work every day is exactly the opposite, to talk to anyone who'll listen to me about how to do a better job of being alive as a human being, how to live a happier, more fulfilled, more flourishing, splendorous human life. I've been thinking lately about an idea that I call underfathered. This may end up being the title of a book, Underfathered. This is an idea that grows out of a book that I published earlier this year called Father's Day, about young fathers and what they're getting wrong in their families, and why what they're getting wrong in their families is destroying their families, destroying their lives, destroying their wives' lives, and destroying their children's lives. And when I published the book, I heard back from a lot of young men who talked to me about their own fathers, and particularly about a father that I didn't cover in the book. We cover 3 fathers in the book. Mr. Married, who was the happily married man, very much like the character Loki in the story Sigurd's Swing, a very happily married man who was very much in control of his marriage, is Mr. Married. We talk about Mr. Divorced, who is exactly the opposite of Mr. Married. He screwed up his marriage, and now he's divorced, and now he's basically screwing up the rest of his life being divorced. And in between the two, we have Mr. Maybe, who is the young father that I want to talk to, sort of married, sort of committed, sort of glad to be a father, sort of happy to be doing what he's doing, sort of sticking around, sort of not. He's an ass between 2 bales of hay, and his inability to choose one or the other will result in unlimited destruction in due course, not through anybody's plan or intention, but the opposite, through his inattention. I want that dad to wake up. That dad is very important to me, because children having fathers is what results in successful human beings. That a successful human being doesn't necessarily have Mr. Married for a father, but if you take the entire cohort of successfully raised children, children who make it through high school, make it through college, make it out on their own, end up married with children of their own, homes of their own, businesses of their own, end up, prosperous like their parents. Their children are prosperous like they are. Their grandchildren are growing into the same kind of life. When you look at that cohort of people, Mr. Married is always the dad. And the dad that I left out of this picture, because I wasn't talking about fathers that age, is a dad that we call Mr. Stick It Out. Mr. Married almost certainly will end up being Mr. Maybe almost certainly will end up being Mr. Divorced. In the present climate that we're in, this is the way that marriages fail. They fail with divorce. But if Mr. Maybe doesn't want to step it up to become Mr. Married, which he can always do and I deeply encourage, but if he doesn't want to step it up to become Mr. Married, then he's going to either become Mr. Divorced or become Mr. Stick It Out. In other words, mom and dad are going to decide to stick it out for the sake of the children, and they will live in a state of low affection, low rancor, low satisfaction, low disappointment, low everything. They will live low-grade lives with each other in order to stick it out for the children. And this is the dad that I heard about from a whole lot of young men who didn't know how lucky they were to have Mr. Stick It Out as a father, that Mr. Stick It Out may seem less than satisfactory until your dad is Mr. Divorced or Mr. Dead. Every one of us would be massively benefited to have Mr. Married as our father, and almost none of us does. And that's why I like the word underfathered. I kept talking about fatherlessness, and people would immediately say, but wait, he has a father. There's a father in the home. Well, okay, there's a father in the home, but he's not living up to his responsibilities in the way that we expect a father to live up to his responsibilities, in the way that Mr. Married lives up to his responsibilities, and therefore we can say that his children are underfathered. They're not unfathered. You can't be unfathered. To be alive as a human being is to have a father, at least so far. We can't do it without the little squiggly wiggly worm that sneaks in there 9 months before anybody has any big jobs to do, and therefore can be gone 9 months before he's called upon to do any of those big jobs. This is a state of nature problem that it is eminently possible for human offspring to be unfathered, not unfathered in the sense of no sperm penetration, but underfathered to the point that they have no fathering whatever, that they didn't have a dad, never had a dad, maybe didn't have good male role models of any sort around. That is certainly the case for many children now. The riots that we're seeing in Ferguson, Missouri are 100% the symptom of fatherlessness. These are young men who run wild because no one ever led them to the path of righteousness with stern looks, strong words, and a half Nelson to frog march you where you needed to go to make up for what you shouldn't have done and what you need to make right. These men never learned that. Their sisters never learned how to respond to that kind of male authority, and therefore when they meet and mate, they never really merge into marriages because she's never learned to yield to appropriate authority. He's never learned to yield to appropriate authority. These children are underfathered to the greatest extent one can be and still survive. They are underfathered almost unto death. They live right at the margin all the time. And many, many, many children are in that state right now. And many others aren't very far removed from it. And that if you look at children growing up today, 40% no father at home at all. Another 40% have Mr. Maybe or Mr. Stick It Out. Of the remaining 20%, is that really Mr. Married? It's a continuum. It's a graduated degree from half decent to really exceptional, but maybe 10% of the children growing up in America right now have decent fathers at home, and the rest do not. And we look at the pathologies that we associate with adult babies of all ages, because adult babies can be my age. I'm going to be 55 this year. There are people my age who are adult babies. You could argue that I am. But the younger we get, the more juvenile and the more infantile the behavior that we see, and the characteristic behaviors of fatherless children, high drama in their social work relationships, lots and lots of evictions, credit problems, things like that, poor impulse control with regard to sex, liquor, gambling, risk-taking, risky behavior, high degree of instability, all through life, frankly. From the very beginning of the unfathered process, the instability begins, and that's when we see fractured relationships, father's gone, stepfather moves in, stepfather's gone, new stepfather moves in, children added, children removed, with all of these mix and match marriages, and then the child graduates into adult life slowly, and the instability just continues. Instability on the job, instability in residential situations, and especially instability in relationships. The relationships don't last. These children never learned storgic love because they've never really known it. They've never really seen it all the way, that they've benefited from it all their lives, because that's what keeps parents changing those diapers, making macaroni night after night after night, watching that same damn movie 1,300 times. What keeps them doing it is storgic love. One of the things I talk about in Sig and Swing is how young a baby is the first time it is set down on a swing, and how little it moves, and how excited it is by it all, and how mommy saying we is 100% a hustle, and yet the baby buys it anyway. The baby believes it. All of this stuff, this is storgic love, and it is 100 bazillion instances as you're growing up that your parents display their storgic love for you, and it's how you learn to return it to them, and it's how you learn to express it to other people, and it's how you learn to fall and stay in love, is by mastering that. And if you don't master that in childhood, you're crippled in every way as a grown-up. And these are the virtues that we learn from our fathers. I don't want to take anything away from mothers. No mothers, no babies. No fathers, no babies. No mothers, no babies. But the things that a mother does for you uniquely, the things that a mother does for you that cannot be done by the father and cannot be done by anyone else, are very few in number and very limited in scope. They don't last very long, whereas all of the other things that both parents do can be adequately done by the father, and virtually all of them, especially everything involving the moral instruction of the child, are far better done by the father, because boys and girls will both yield to their father, but at some point the boys will stop yielding to their mother. Men don't yield to women. This is why Bossy can't lead. It doesn't matter how many books you write or how many articles you write, how many laws you pass, how many protests you stage, how many lawsuits you file. It really doesn't matter. The reason that women do not manage large mixed-sex organizations, big companies, big armies, big universities, big governments, the reason that women do not lead these things as a rule, there are exceptions, but the reason they don't lead these things as a rule is that men will not yield to women, and therefore the only leadership strategy that a woman can deploy in a role like that is bossiness, is screaming, is terrorism, and that strategy will drive all the talent away and will result ultimately in the failure of the organization. It is not a defect of women that they can't lead men. It is simply a fact of our nature. Women can't lead men. Men can lead men and women. Men will yield to men who exhibit appropriate authority. They will yield to them, and they will accept their leadership, and they will accept their leadership without yelling, screaming, terrorism, threats. And men will not yield to women in the same way. There are particular exceptions that you can name in 3 cheers for you, but they represent substantially less than 2% of the population, and therefore I'm not interested. I'm just not interested. But what makes all this interesting in light of the implosion of Stefan Molyneux, of course, is that Stefan Molyneux is himself unfathered, underfathered. He will insist that he has a father, he loves his father, yakety smackety blah. Now he hates his father, and his father hates him, and his father wants to kill him, and who gives a rat's ass? Personal examples are interesting as anecdotes, but the plural of anecdote is not data, and the anecdote by itself proves absolutely nothing. Every story is fiction. Every story is fiction in the sense that you can't verify what I said, and I promise you that I improved it, not intending to mislead you, but just embellishing what seemed most important to me and omitting what seemed least important, and everyone does that, and certainly Molyneux does that himself, and he does it for 3 hours a day, 7 days a week, thus to occupy all of the mind share of his victims. But the man is himself underfathered, and we can see that in his blustering performance. This is typical behavior of a man who doesn't have the confidence that he would have learned from his father. That if we see obesity, we know we're seeing underfathered children. If we see juvenile delinquency, we know we're seeing underfathered children. If we see teen pregnancy or other inappropriate sexual behavior among people who are too young for it, we know we're seeing underfathered behavior. Too much makeup, too short skirts, pants down to your ass. The entire hip-hop movement, all of rap and hip-hop, much of soul and R&B, we are listening to an art that is based out of an unfathered reality. A bunch of children who grow up without fathers, and this is their expression of their lives. Molyneux fits right into that. You could certainly level that same claim at me. My parents, to my knowledge, never lived together after I was born. I don't remember it in any case. I was never aware of living with my father. I lived with my father for the first time when I was 17. I like my father. I have tremendous respect for my father. My father is a good father. He's been a very good father to my younger brothers. I had wonderful male role models when I was growing up, and I really don't feel cheated by any of this. I don't feel myself to be underfathered. And yet you could level that charge against me, and Fine, have at it. I am not in Molyneux's position advising strangers to destroy lifelong storgic relationships on a whim. And I think that this is a perfect evidence of the unfathered psyche of Stefan Molyneux, that he would engage in such vicious, evil behavior. If you have decided to kick him out of your life, you're late, but congratulations, it's exactly the right thing to do. This man is not your friend. I don't care what he says about anything. I'm not interested in what he has to say, because I'm certain that he's nothing but borrowed arguments, particularly borrowing Rothbard's idiotic argument of free market police forces as an allegedly anarcho-capitalist argument, that Rothbard, Friedman, I'm assuming the blocks, I don't even know, heard the term monopoly on force and thought the problem was the monopoly. Oh, the force is okay. Everybody likes being strip searched. Everybody likes being cavity searched. Everybody likes having their houses torn into and ripped apart while the free market police search for missing jewelry. Everybody likes being jailed. Everybody likes being slimed in public for the alleged commission of an alleged crime. Everybody likes those things. It's only the monopoly that's a problem. This is idiotic. And this is why I don't have anything to do with anarcho-capitalists. I think they're idiots. I think they're insane. They have no idea what it would take to result in an actual voluntarist society, and therefore they take everything that exists at present, file off the serial numbers, and then sell it piecemeal and pretend they've made a change. This is the world as imagined by high seas. The train layout is the railroad. The map is the territory. I have no use for any of this, and I really, truly don't care. The only thing that matters to me in the cult of Stefan Molyneux is the defooing, is telling young people to destroy the most important relationships in their lives in exchange for the temporary and instantly revoked approbation of a bully. This is an absurd bargain. This is an insane bargain, and I'm glad that you recognize that fact and you're willing to do something to change it. So here's how we can go about healing the underfathered you, because the fact of the matter is you're underfathered also, and I know that because you fell under the sway of a cult leader. This is one of the key markers of an underfathered child, is falling under the sway of some other authority figure, some other father figure. You are underfathered, you are father hungry, and therefore you went looking for a father and you found one who told you that your real father was abusive in an act of abuse. The most abusive father you have is your adopted father. Throw him out of your life. That's what you need to do, and I think that's what you're doing, or you wouldn't have listened to me so far. You need to throw him out of your life. You're going out of your way to heal your inner juvenile. You're going to have to father yourself. You need to bring yourself up. You need to be the father that you're looking for, because you can't depend on someone else to do it for you. You need to engage with your own father and with your own mother and talk to them about how they can cease to be adult babies, how they can grow into their own humanity, just as you have to grow into your own humanity. But you are all of you adult babies, you are all of you underfathered, and we know this is so because of the results that have happened. If you were appropriately fathered, and if your parents were appropriately fathered, then your children would be appropriately fathered, and your grandchildren would be appropriately fathered. We wouldn't be having this conversation. We're only having this conversation because we live in an underfathered culture right now, which I'm trying to fix. You need to reconcile with your parents and with everyone else that you defooed. You need to get in touch with these people and tell them, hey, look, you know, I fucked up big time. I really screwed up, and I am so sorry. And I want to get together with you, and I want to put things right. And in putting things right, you're not going to do it by confrontation. You're only going to do it by conciliation. And that means it's going to take time. And maybe it takes time over a meal, or on a car trip. A car trip is wonderful because eye contact is limited and you can't escape each other. But that's when you really have to go through everything. And whatever it was that you thought made it necessary for you to throw this person out of your life, you need to go through that with that person and see if you really have a relationship. It may well be the case that you should not have a relationship. I can't tell you that. And neither can Stefan Molyneux. But what I can tell you is that if you did have a relationship, there probably is something worth saving there, and the only way you're going to find out is to go and fix it. So go and fix it. My entire argument of philosophy is built around the idea of practical ontology, which means carrying your claims back to the object. If you can't produce it, I don't believe it. Whatever it is that you're claiming exists, if you can't lay it in my hands where I can touch it, press it on my forehead to take its temperature, stick my tongue out, press it to my tongue so I can taste it, I don't believe you. It doesn't exist. What you should do if you want to understand what works and what doesn't work in a family and why families work the way they work, you should get out and see some families. You need to see your own family. You need to spend time with them. But you know married couples, young couples, older couples, happy couples, unhappy couples. Get yourself invited to dinner. You bring the main course to pay your own way, or bring a 12-pack of beer to pay your own way. But go have dinner with a whole lot of couples and see how they get along, see how they behave, see how their families work. Babysit for your friends who have children, and watch what you yourself do to sway children into doing what they need to do when they'd much rather do what they're doing right now instead. But you should familiarize yourself with the human race. You were living a very monk-like existence before Molyneux caught you. This is the way the world works. And you've been living a more monk-like existence since then, because that's what's happened. You've self-isolated yourself. You've destroyed every relationship that you had before Molyneux, and the relationships you have now you sustain only by towing the line and repeating the dogma, the doctrine, repeating what you've been told. These aren't useful relationships, and they don't tell you anything at all about how people behave. So get out there and see how people behave. See how families really work. Discover the difference between abuse and normal parenting, and accept the fact that you had a completely normal upbringing from completely imperfect parents who more than likely were themselves underfathered and to one degree or another are themselves adult babies. And all of you are on the therapeutic journey to your own humanity. But you are an adult now, and that means you need to deal with them as adults, and that means you accept them for what they are. You accept them as they are, encourage them to become better as you yourself are becoming better. But you're an adult, you can deal with them as adults. They don't owe you anything, you don't owe them anything, and whatever wounds there are between you, you need to find a way to put them behind you so that you can find a way to love each other. And the reason for that is because the family is the integral, the absolutely essential building block of human life, of human, not just human civilization, because if it were just you and your family living alone in some isolated place, still your family would be your primary tool of survival. The objectivists, the big O objectivists, like to say the human mind is the man's primary tool of survival, and that is true in a sense, except that human beings are never found in isolation. Only by extreme accident are they found in isolation. Human beings live in families, and the survival engine of the human race, of the human species, is the family. The family is your last redoubt against every sort of tyranny, tyranny from the state, tyranny from the church, tyranny from your looting neighbors, and tyranny from demagogues like Stefan Molyneux. That anything that you let drive a wedge between you and your family will leave you all alone whenever it is that whoever is holding that wedge decides to turn on you. And the only people that you know in your life who will not turn on you when everyone else does are the members of your family, your mother, your father, your spouse, your children, your brothers and sisters, your cousins, nieces, nephews, uncles, aunts, the people who've known you all your life, who love you in spite of everything that you might have done in the past, in spite of everything that you might be doing now, who love you regardless, and who will stand by you when everyone else has left you, has turned on you, has made an enemy of you. And for you to do anything to damage those relationships is absurd. It's insane. It is completely self-destructive. And if you have done this, you need to fix it. You need to say goodbye to Stefan Molyneux. He is not good for you. But you need to go back and embrace all of the people that you betrayed in Molyneux's behalf and repair those relationships, because those are the relationships that matter most in your life. And those are the relationships that will result in your own happiness, flourishing, satisfaction, in your own splendor.